This is the third week of Human Action for World Futures, and this topic we want to start exploring the future. The last 2 weeks we've been thinking more about human actions in the past. Here we want to think about possible ways we ourselves could shape the future. What sort of scenarios can we envisage? So it's projection. Now, admittedly, we can never be sure about the future, of course we can't. But at least we can have an educated guess. And more importantly, we can start to envisage futures we'd like to see and perhaps ways which we might be able to act now to try and get these visions actually enacted. Okay, so we're going to move on in this topic to two fairly traditional ways of thinking about the future and future scenarios. And then for the rest of the tutorial, we want to move on to getting you ready to do project work. Projects are a very important part of this course. Really quite a creative part, which we're sure you'll enjoy. So, back to the notes and resources. Okay, as we said, the first 2 weeks are really about the past and what humans have done to the world already. But much more exciting in many ways is thinking about the future. And there's quite a lot of different groups who have got together and started thinking about how do we, not exactly prophesy, but at least get closer to ideas of what the future could look like than just pure guesswork. And one of the most important ways they're doing this is scenario building. You'll hear more about this later, but we've got a resource which you should definitely look at. This is one of the most important resources in this area. The Great Transitions Initiative. This particular resource I've given you is not actually the Great Transitions Initiative, it's someone else talking about it. The key person is probably this man here, Paul Raskin. He's been leading in this field now for 10 or 15 years. He's developed some great ideas, and if I move on to his actual website, Great Transitions Initiative, if you just briefly go into that, you get a much better idea of what these visions, these scenarios, how they're built and why they're built. One of the things you'll find most futurologists agree with is you of course can't predict the future, nor can you come up with one scenario. Mostly they start to develop a whole series of scenarios or futures that they think are plausible. Scenarios would be bringing in a much better world, a scenario which might be just business as usual, a scenario which means that the human condition might degenerate to a state of barbarism. This is the stuff you should be reading about here. So that's the first resource, very open. As I say, we'll be taking on it again later on. Another way of thinking about the futures is to go to people like brought out in this resource here, the Futurist, where every year they go to about 10 or 15 leading scientific thinkers or social thinkers and ask them about their forecasts and the rationale behind them. I find this a very much kind of exciting but probably less plausible approach, but a good thing to look at and start thinking about. So we've asked you to look at the 10 prophecies, if you like, from experts in the field, and then perhaps going back to an earlier year, 2013 or even 2012, and just look at the sort of forecasts that people were coming up with then. You'll find that quite instructive. Forecasts of this sort are fairly fashionable. They bring up the latest ideas, the gee whiz. To my mind, a little bit cheap. The broader thing in the Great Transitions Initiative is a much more studied long-term thinking about the future. Both are necessary and both are worthwhile looking at here. So specifically for this tutorial, we've asked you to focus on, if you like, the second resource and think about what do you reckon are the 2 or 3 most likely forecasts that I'd like it to come about. That'll be the first half of the tutorial. The second half will be mostly devoted to setting up your project groups. The project is probably one of the most exciting things you can do in this semester. It's yours. You can really go into depth in a particular area that you find most interesting. We'll explain more in the tutorial, so please come ready to go into your forum groups We will divide them into your project groups, and we should have a little bit of time to think about initial possible projects. Thank you very much.